Hello there, my name is Bradley, and I'm somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. What I do to get this fix of adrenaline is I would go out in search of nothing in particular and just hope something happens. Sometimes, I get more than I wanted. This is one of those stories, with the exception that I wasn't seeking adrenaline this time. Be warned that some events in this story may be disturbing for the faint of heart. This is your warning. Continue at your own risk. The date is October 14th, 2010. I used to live on a decently sized property in the mountains of northwestern Georgia. I loved it up there. So many places to wander off to, so many places to have a little hideout. It was the day before my uncle's birthday, and me and him wanted to go out to our favorite hangout spot, which we called the broccoli tree. In a nutshell, it was an uprooted tree with a hole big enough to fit a couple of chairs and some other things where the roots had been. We did some modifications and put up a tarp over it, so we could stay in there if it rained. So me and my uncle are walking out to the tree, which is about a good 15-minute walk from the front porch of the house. As soon as we break into the tree line, we start messing around and pushing each other playfully without a care in the world. My uncle and I had walked to the tree so many times we could find it in pitch black darkness, so we really weren't that afraid. I sort of had this feeling that we were being watched, but I just shrugged it off a little and kept walking. Skip forward a little bit to our arrival at the tree. Nothing seemed out of place, so we went inside and sat down. We started to talk about specific things and what we had seen out hunting and things like that. Then he mentioned a Skinwalker. Confused, I asked him what it was, and he broke it down so I could understand. He said they were half man and half beast that could shapeshift. I laughed at this and asked if he had been playing too much Diablo recently, not thinking he was serious. He looked me in the eyes, with a dead serious look on his face, and says he saw one while he was hunting. My excitement immediately turned to fear, as I remembered that I felt something was watching us on the way to the tree. I told him I had the feeling we were being watched, and he said he felt it too. We started listening closely to see if we could hear anything outside the tree, but everything was silent. We both looked at each other and decided we had to leave. We emerged from the tree and he tells me to jump onto his back so he can run. I do so, and the moment I was on his back and he had a tight grip, we heard something from behind us. I go to turn around and look to see what it was, but my uncle told me not to. Then he started running to the house in almost pitch black darkness with something chasing after us. I could hear its footfalls behind us, and heavy breathing was getting louder as if it was getting closer. I scream for my uncle to go faster, and he starts dead-ass sprinting through the woods. Then the front porch light comes into view through the trees, and I say, "There it is!" Then my uncle trips over himself and we both catch air. I was flung a little higher, so I landed closer to the house than he did. I looked back at him and then he screamed at me to run, and not to worry about him. I didn't listen. I ran over to help him up when something hit me square in the chest and knocked me back. "Don't look!" my uncle screamed. I wish I would have listened. I look up to see a man with a dog-like head and glowing solid white eyes. My uncle tries to scurry away from it, but it grabs him and picks him up to his feet and stares into his eyes. Then came a gunshot. The beast tosses my uncle into a tree and scurries away frightened. That's when my other uncle comes up from behind me and helps my uncle up off the ground. I slowly stand up and wipe myself off, and ask what that thing was. The uncle that was with me says only one word: Skinwalker. Then all three of us go back up to the house. A couple of days later, the uncle that was with me was deployed overseas to Korea for the army. We tried to forget, but we just couldn't seem to get it off our minds. One night, I woke up at about 4 a.m. because of a dream I had of it. I rubbed my eyes and let them adjust to the low levels of the light, and see the two glowing eyes again, right outside my window. I grabbed the flashlight I had in my room for late-night bathroom runs and shine it at the window. Within a few seconds, the Skinwalker ran away, and I have yet to see him again. To this day, both of my uncles have not spoken a word about this, and refuse to speak about it. A little backstory to this. Me and my childhood friend would sneak out at night and go to the park and play. I lived in a really good neighborhood, and the park was only a few minutes walk away, but my parents never gave me much freedom to go outside, so this was my last resort to play at the park. He would usually come around 12 to 12:30, once his dad was asleep, and knock on my window. Mind you, he would literally keep knocking until I responded, or woke up the house. He was persistent at waking me up, to say the least. A big point to this is that he would never come any earlier than midnight, and he never said anything but knock to wake me up, since he didn't want my parents to hear him, even though he'd knock louder if I wasn't responding. We were both around 8 to 10 at the time. Anyways, at this time it was only 8:30 at night. The window in my room is positioned right behind my bed. My bedroom light's on, and my mom is watching TV. I'm in the living room with the lights on as well, and she's far away. We had a pretty big house, but the living room is still visible to me from my room. I'm just laying in my bed playing on my DS when I hear something clawing up the fence behind me. I thought it was a cat because at the time we had dirt fields all around my house, but this sounded more deep and slower, like it was a person somehow, but with claws. I heard whatever it was perch up on the fence and get settled, and then I completely lost my stomach when I heard from the window, "Hey, it's me. Come outside." It sounded like my friend, but different at the same time. I was terrified and just laid there not moving, and eventually I somehow passed out and woke up in the morning. The next day I looked around the fence and there was a long scratch across it, near the bottom, but that was it. I walked a couple houses down to my friend's and asked him if he came over last night. He said he couldn't, because his dad was hanging out in the living room until 1 to 2 a.m. and couldn't get out. The story was told to me by my brother. It occurred during the early 2000s. Smartphones had not been invented yet. Only shitty flip phones with sketchy cellular service. My brother was an electrician, a journeyman. He was employed in a small border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup is situated on the cusp of the Navajo Nation reservation, in the area called the Checkerboard Area, due to the fact that there are designated plots of land that are considered part of the res, and the next plot of the land is not, like a checkerboard. There's a large population of multiple tribes in the area, such as Navajo, Pueblo, Zuni, etc. One night, my brother and one of his co-workers, who was Chinese American, were the only two employees on call, in case of emergencies. A power line goes down or something catastrophic happens like that in the middle of nowhere, outside of Gallup towards the Continental Divide. He receives the call in the early morning hours shortly after 1 a.m. The co-worker had recently become the father of a newborn baby, but desperately needed the hours. My brother calls him, and they agree to meet up at the company stockyard. My brother waits about an hour or so. His coworker still hasn't shown. It is strict company protocol to never go on jobs alone, always in pairs or more, due to the hazardous nature of high voltage lines and electricity in general. My brother's coworker calls and tells him that something is wrong with the newborn, and he needs to take his wife to the ER, and he'll meet up with them on site. Also another injunction. They are strictly instructed to show up to the job site in the company vehicles, which are equipped with tools required for the job and all that. My brother understands and doesn't want his coworker to be docked pay or written up for violating company policy. Against his better judgment, he heads out alone. The job site is quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The power line spanning across the vast desert, with red rock mesas in the far distance, in the daylight at least. At nighttime, it's pitch black New Mexican desert. Only dirt roads and no houses or streetlights for miles. None could be seen along the entire horizon. He waits as long as he cares to for his coworker. He figures he'll assess the damage on his own, and by the time his coworker shows up, he'll have a solution. He suits up and begins crawling the tall wooden pole. The company truck is parked facing towards the pole. The high beams illuminated the base and subsequent foreground. He reached the top of the pole. Some time passes as he's trying to calibrate the issue or solve the problem. The power outage. Something on the ground below him catches the corner of his peripherals. He looks down in disbelief and shock as his mind tries to make sense of what he's seeing. He described it as a man crawling on all fours, wearing the skin of a coyote. The skin draped along its back with the limbs like dead weight dangling towards the ground. He watches as the creature patrols the area. He said he witnessed the Skinwalker encircle the truck with smaller and smaller orbits, until eventually he stood up on 2 feet and peered inside the window of the truck on the driver's side. He described the motions of the Skinwalker and said it was moving as if it was confused as to what was going on or where the driver of the truck was. From his vantage point, he could infer that the Skinwalker was male, was painted with black paint and white clay. Then on the horizon he can see headlights. His coworker was en route. The Skinwalker also noticed this, not figuring out that he was up on the power line pole. As his partner approached closer, the Skinwalker runs off into the dark on all fours. The rest of the trouble call was uneventful in regards to the Skinwalker.